You know how some stories start off with a lesson or a gentle nudge at your heart, but this one, man, it grabs you by the collar in the first breath and doesn't let go. Because when Professor Whitmore turned to that shy kid at the back of the room and said, "Mr. Johnson, surely someone of your background can solve this simple equation." It was more than just a math problem. It was a test, a challenge, a shot fired in a war that kid didn't start, but sure as hell was ready to finish. That's the thing people miss about these quiet kids. You push them, and sometimes they'll show you something that turns your whole world upside down. You know what I mean? So, there he was, 12-year-old Marcus Johnson, hands shaking just a little in that faded uniform his mom had pressed before dawn, standing on the edge of a world that was never really built for kids like him. Peton Academy, with its marble staircases and old money smell, all eyes and whispers about who belonged and who didn't. He'd gotten there by grinding through problem sets at a library while his mom worked double shifts at the hospital, dodging power outages and bullies, learning early that numbers don't care if you're rich or poor, black or white, they just are. That first morning, as he clutched his scholarship letter, he could almost hear his mother's voice in his ear. "You belong here, baby. Don't let anybody tell you different." But Peton wasn't just another school. It was a fortress of tradition, with golden plaques and old portraits glaring down, halls echoing with stories of senators, judges, Seosol faces that looked nothing like his. The other kids, breezed and smelling like privilege and private tutors, talking about yachts and summer math camps, glancing at Marcus like he'd wandered onto the wrong stage. Some even said out loud, "Are you lost?" And when he showed them his student ID, it was always, "Oh, one of those diversity kids." But Marcus, man, he'd been through worse and knew how to let the noise bounce off while he focused on what mattered. After all, numbers had been his escape since he was old enough to hold a pencil, proof that the universe made sense somewhere, even if the world didn't. First period, advanced mathematics. Room 314 pi. How about that for a sign? He found his seat in the middle, not hiding but not showing off either, pulling out his battered notebook full of proofs and scribbled dreams. And then Professor Whitmore walked in legendary tie, sharper than a razor, eyes like ice, the kind of man who didn't just teach math, he guarded the gates. The professor looked around, sizing up each student, pausing when he saw Marcus, the only black kid in the room. And just for a heartbeat, that gaze said everything. "You don't belong here." Yeah, that happened. You could feel the tension building, the professor drawing lines between the real students and the others, pushing Marcus for his background, mocking self-study, nudging the room to laugh along. And it worked. For a second, those smirks and glances, the whispers about lowering standards. But Marcus didn't flinch. He answered straight, talking about libraries, free online lectures, working proofs by candlelight when the lights went out at home. The professor moved on, but you could see the plan forming. There would be a test, a moment to expose the imposter and prove tradition right. Fast forward a couple days, and Whitmore stands at the board, chalk dancing as he writes a brutal differential equation, tricky, beautiful, and right in the middle, one tiny, deliberate error. He knew the well-coached kids would follow, but only real talent would spot the trap. The room settles in, pens scratching, but Marcus, he just stares at the board, eyes flickering through the lines, and there it is, the slightest frown. Professor calls on him, the room ready for a show, but instead Marcus quietly says, "There's an issue with your equation, sir." Cue the laughter, the tension, the professor pushing back, but Marcus just asks, "May I approach the board?" And with steady hands, he circles the error, explains the contradiction, then solves it clean, even dropping a new Technicia substitution. So elegant Sarah Chin, a math prodigy in her own right, starts Googling it on the spot. No record. This kid just invented something, right there under pressure with half the room rooting for him to fail. The board fills with mathematics like music, and by the time he's done, even the professor's hands are shaking. Because you can't argue with truth. Chalk doesn't care about prejudice. But it doesn't stop there, because that's how life works. The crowd starts to shift. Sarah's excited. The Henderson twins just look lost. Timothy Professor's golden boys, it's frozen. And Whitmore, man, he's unraveling, realizing the test was never for Marcus, but for himself. That afternoon, Whitmore goes digging, calls Marcus's old school, checks his admissions file, even reaches out to the MIT Young Scholars Program. Turns out, Marcus had submitted a paper to them at 10 from a homeless shelter address and scored perfect twice on an entrance exam that Peton thought was too hard for any real kid to ace. The evidence just piles up, knocking down every old excuse, every comfortable bias. Then you get the twist one you don't see coming. While Whitmore's wrestling with his own failure, his young colleague, Dr. Samuel Chin, walks in and tells him how Marcus tutors other kids for free, how he believes math is beautiful and everyone deserves to see its beauty. Whitmore learns Marcus has been reworking some of the professor's own research problems and even found a tiny error in one that's been cited for decades, but was too polite to point it out. Meanwhile, Marcus keeps grinding. Home is a small apartment where the elevator breaks down more than it works, but inside, it's warm and bright, filled with the hope his mother poured into every shift and every meal skipped. When Marcus gets selected for the national math competition, his mom brings home a used graphing calculator from a pawn shop, scratched, but perfect. They celebrate with pasta and late-night problem sets, Diane asking questions, always listening, even if the math flew over her head. "Are you happy, baby?" she asks. And Marcus, he tells her the truth. When the patterns make sense, it's like music only I can hear. Yeah. Let me back up, assess it's the kind of love that turns surviving into thriving, you know? The training for nationals is brutal, 6 hours a day, weekends, every brain cell firing. Timothy starts to respect Marcus. Sarah steps up her game. Even the twins come around. But Marcus, he's on another level, solving not just the assigned problems, but taking on one of Whitmore's own unsolved research puzzles and cracking it on the spot, right there in class. Whitmore gives up the pretense, starts pushing Marcus toward bigger things, calls in favors, arranges scholarships, and when he hands Marcus a rare math book, it's like passing the torch from one generation to the next. There's a sense that the old professor, for all his pride, has finally found the student he's been waiting his whole life to teach. Then comes the big day, the National Mathematics Olympiad. Hundreds of the country's best, 5 brutal problems, for hours. Marcus glides through the first 3, stretches, spots a twist in problem 4. And when he hits problem 5, a beast tied to one of math's oldest unsolved questions, she does something nobody expects. He doesn't solve the impossible, but proves why it's true for an entire class of numbers, invents a new bridge between theories, and when the results come in, he's the only kid with a perfect score. First in history. The ceremony is electric, his mom crying in the stands, the professor sobbing for the first time in years, the old school order upended. The Johnson-Whitmore theorem gets published, and suddenly, doors that were slammed shut start swinging open. MIT, Princeton, scholarships, a new initiative named after Marcus to help other kids with talent but no money. Timothy, humbled but not broken, starts to see that excellence isn't about birthright, and even the old guard grudgingly claps as Marcus stands in that auditorium, finally seen for who he is. And just when you think it's all wrapped up, Marcus slips home, sits at his battered desk, and writes his mom a note. "Thank you for believing in my dreams when nobody else did." He leaves her pasta in the fridge, then cracks open another problem, because for Marcus, the real competition isn't against other kids, it's against every door that was ever closed, every expectation he ever shattered. And as the light flickers in that tiny apartment, you know this is just the beginning. Because brilliance isn't about where you start. It's about what you do when you get the chance. So, I gotta ask, after all that, do you really believe genius needs a pedigree? Or are you ready to admit it can bloom anywhere, even from a library with spotty Wi-Fi and a mom who'd give up everything just for a kid to shine? Let me know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Where do you see the line between tradition and real talent? What would you have done in Whitmore's shoes? This story isn't just about math. It's about recognizing the light in people the world overlooks. And maybe, just maybe, it's about all of us learning to see that light a little clearer. If this story made you feel something, share it, talk about it. Let's keep these conversations going. Because who knows? The next Marcus Johnson might be watching, just waiting for someone to open the door.